teach our kids, teach them. I don't care if they're 2, if they're 18 months, and especially as they're getting older, like teach them, empower your children, put the ball in their court, lead them to having amazing health as they get older. Welcome to the Core Connections podcast. Hey, I'm Erica Zeal, nutrition coach, Pilates instructor, fascial expert, and a mom of 3. I'm the creator behind Core Athletica, my core rehab program, instructor training courses, and my prenatal Knocked Up Fitness membership. The core focus of my podcast is to help you improve the quality of your life. Today's quote of the day is, "Knowledge is power." And I absolutely love saying that because it's true. Now, there could be sometimes ignorance is bliss, but for today's conversation, I feel very strongly that knowledge is power because I want to talk about our kids. And this is something that I cannot stress enough. If you are a parent, this is a must listen to if you're ever planning to have children, or if you know anyone, which is a lot of people, right, that have kids or planning to have children. Please share today's episode with them because I am going to talk about kids' nutrition and how it relates to their health and development. And I know a lot of what I talk about today, we can definitely branch off and dive in even deeper, but my initial conversation I want to talk about today is because a lot of these things come up in my day-to-day life with other parents that I come across, with students, with other moms, other parents, my own kids. So I'm going to share with you some of the things that I do in my life with my kids and that I have found that have worked. And as many of you know, if you've listened to me before, right, we're gluten-free in my household. And a lot of that initially started with, my whole household being gluten-free because of my son and his allergies and asthmatic stuff, and we saw such incredible difference in him, which then really led me to dive in deeper to not only the gluten, but the dyes and the chemicals and the toxins and so much stuff that's in our food and in our environment and all of that stuff. And so I cannot stress enough how it's so important as parents to become more aware of what I'm going to talk about today, and let's pass it along to our children. Right now today, whatever age your children are, or again, if you're pre-having children, even better because you can prepare right off the bat. Okay, so let's dive on in. For starters, your children's nutrition really starts pre-pregnancy. If you've never had a baby, or even if you're planning to have another one, or down the road, things that you can do now today to improve your nutrition can impact your future children. Pretty cool, huh? Then we go into, obviously, during pregnancy, very, very important to eat healthy. And then the baby is born, and either you're going to be nursing the child or bottle feeding with formula. And I'm not going to go too deep into this because we could talk for hours just about nursing and bottle feeding, but I want to just go through this whole cycle because if you are not able to nurse or choose not to, whichever, I'm not here to judge, but if you do choose to formula feed for one reason or another, Sammy's milk, so that wasn't even around with my first or second. So keep in mind, I've been teaching nutrition for quite some time, and my oldest is 11 now, and my youngest is 6. So I've been well immersed into different stages of kids' nutrition, and it has evolved over the years, and I've learned a lot along the way. There's things that I've done better than others. There's periods I look back and I was like, we can always look back and say, oh, I wish I would have, right? And we can't do that. We have to start where we're at today on this journey that we're on. And I feel like if we look at it as a journey, no matter what age your children are or future children, when you start to implement these things, hopefully sooner rather than later, it can make a huge impact. So it is never, ever, ever too late. So Sammy's milk was one that was available once my youngest was a baby, and it was amazing. I wish I would have had it with my middle. I think he wouldn't have had some of the health issues that we had because I thought I knew what I was doing when it came to formula, and we had to supplement him sooner than I wanted to. And anyway, I guess I just want you to all look at the labels, read, dive in, do a little bit more research, and please, if you have a question, do not hesitate to reach out to me on Instagram, or if you're on my newsletter list, email me back, because even I try to get back to everybody. I honestly do. If I get a lot of similar questions, that tells me that a lot of you want to know the same information, and I would love to do a podcast or find someone else to interview about that. So please, please, please reach out to me and let me know if you've got specific questions that you think of when you're listening to any of my podcasts. Then we go into this transitional from nursing or bottle feeding into introduction to real food. We have got to stop feeding our children rice, cereal, and things with lots of grains. There's really no nutritional value in them. I know it's kind of like shoved down our throat, like, oh, we eat this, we eat that. Well, it's not. So start your kids on avocados, unless there is a rare person that might be allergic or sensitive to avocados, but very, very, very few. So it's a really, really safe, good food to feed a baby. Once, of course, they're transitioning, that 6-ish months, whenever it is, they're ready to start eating some real solid food. That's a good first food. And then, giving them the veggies and beans, and obviously putting them in baby form. And if they don't have many teeth, they need to be, pureed. Now, if they have a lot of teeth, you can just probably kind of mash up things and give it to them that way. I did that with my oldest, and you guys, it worked really, really well. But she had a mouthful of teeth at a really young age. So I was able to feed her things sooner, where with my third, I had to do more pureed things and stuff like that. So we have to take each child individually as well, right? But my biggest point is I just want you to think about what it is we're feeding our child. Just because you're buying it at a health food store, look at the label. If the first ingredient is rice, not a great option, okay? Because that's just filler food. It's grains, and we could be starting inflammation in our children's gut at a really, really young age when it's really unnecessary and we don't need to. So no wheat. You guys, I can't stress enough. Don't even get your kids started on wheat at a young age, just because, again, it could be leading to inflammation in the gut and in the body right off the bat. A lot of little kids I know have eczema, and I've since learned, because I experienced it with my middle child, that eczema, you guys, is connected with gluten. And you've heard me say that before. Our skin is our biggest organ in our body. So whenever there's a skin issue, whether it be with a child or an adult, we need to first go and look at our nutrition and our gut. Cannot stress that enough. You've got to look and really focus on what is my child eating? Are they getting enough fat? And this goes for a child of any age. Think about this, right? What our kids eat can really affect, it does affect their health currently and down the road in the future, and their development. We all want the best for our children. So I want to help you to make it easier so you can better be more aware of what is it we're feeding our children. Big question I always ask is, are they getting enough fat? The brain needs a lot of fat. So when you're pregnant, when you're nursing, actually pre-pregnancy, with your little ones, making sure you're getting good quality fats like coconut oils, avocado oils, butter even, just make sure it's grass-fed organic, or doing ghee is a good option. Good quality fish oil. And side note is, if the fish oil that you are currently doing, if it's really fishy, you burp it up and you're like, oh my gosh, that's a sign that it's not a good quality one, or it's gone bad and rancid. So keep that in mind with our oils. Obviously avocados right up there on the top of the list. You get to that age where you can introduce nuts. Some people I know will introduce nuts before the age of 1, and so you guys can all look into that more. But depending on where you're comfortable at with introducing nuts and things, providing they don't have a sensitivity to nuts. And even if they do, don't fret, because even if you've got a child who can't have any nuts or peanuts, anything like that, there's still plenty of food out there. Sometimes we have to put our thinking cap on and get a little creative with food. And I love to do that. I'm like, okay, well, if my kids can't have gluten and I can't have soy and really try not to eat corn and, the whole list of things, to me, that's a challenge. It's a good challenge and I like it. And so I'm like, well, let's figure this out. And that's one thing I love to do. And that's one thing that really pushed me to create my newer core nutrition program, because the recipes in there, we really worked on them. So we're addressing allergies and food preferences, vegetarian, dairy-free, nut-free, things like that, because it really is possible to eat really healthy as an adult, to teach our children, right? So I started with the whole knowledge is power. And I can't stress this enough with our children. I think sometimes we forget how smart they are. Like, yeah, we all know our kids are smart, right? Are we really teaching them at the moments we could be using the opportunity to teach our child? Like today, this is why we're eating avocado, even to your 2-year-old. It's gonna help make them healthy, and you may have to explain what health means. Remind a child of the time where they were sick and be like, you don't like to feel sick, right? And so when we can compare, okay, being sick is no fun, but if we work harder to feed and nourish our body with healthier foods on a regular basis, that could help us so we don't get sick as often. And they're going to be like, I'm sold. It is amazing when you open up that conversation with a child. I started more with my middle, opening that knowledge conversation, than I did with my oldest. I look back, obviously, again, wishing I had with my oldest, but she didn't have the health issues that I've had with my middle. And so that's where I really learned, at such a young age, you can start to teach them these things, right? When they don't feel good and you're like, okay, well, we're going to take gluten out. We're going to either minimize or get rid of the dairy. And then obviously we've got other toxins, like just chemicals that are added in foods. We've got gums, we got carrageenan, and it can be challenging to avoid those things, but it is possible with a little preparation. It doesn't have to be crazy amounts. But when we start to teach our kids, even looking at the labels or explaining to them that the gluten causes their eczema, but side note, you guys, it doesn't always clear up within a matter of days or a couple weeks even. The eczema, the skin stuff, that could take a couple months. From my personal observations, what I've seen is if he gets gluten, it's not purposeful. It was literally accidental. He ate a slice of thin crust pizza, and within days, eczema popped out on his body, and it took full 3 months to really see it go away. And it did finally, and then we're fine as long as he doesn't accidentally eat gluten. The teachers know it's put as an allergy. Don't be hesitant as the parent. You have the choice to write allergy stuff. If you don't want your child eating gluten or dairy, put it down that they have an allergy, because you know your child better than anybody else. So do that. Just because they haven't had this test and that test, and yeah, we could go do all those tests, but there are some things where I get people that ask me, well, Erica, what test should I do and this and that? Across the board, I have yet to really find one that I'm like, this is the one to do. So listening to our body, or teaching our children to listen to their body, asking them questions, teaching them, like an example is, oh, carrots are really good for your eyes, and learn up a little bit on like what vegetables and what fruits are good for what parts of the body, and helping them to develop and things like that, because your kids will eat that up, and they're going to be like, this is great. I'm eating carrots. My eyes are going to be better. Like, you'll get little kids that will say that because they know that information. And if you're struggling to get them to eat their healthy food, like, give them healthy options. So we kind of put the ball in their court, right? So a good example might be, okay, so tonight we're going to have either celery or carrots. Obviously, that's not the whole entire meal, but like as a vegetable addition, especially if your children are a little older, and you're trying to create better habits, it can be more challenging, but I just stick with it. Baby steps. I don't know how I'd recommend completely overhauling everything overnight. I'm going to talk about that here in a minute, of how to transition into that, but give them an option. Example, just be like, tonight for your side vegetable, would you like to have celery or carrots? And dip it. You can dip it in hummus. Heck, you can even dip it in ranch. Just buy like an organic, healthy ranch, not one that's like pumped full of processed stuff, right? Okay, so again, things like that, we can think about that. So they get a choice of one or the other. Now you might hear, well, I don't want either. Remind them, let's pick one, and I just want you to try it. So we're thinking about these foods because I've worked really hard with my kids. I don't want to be the parent. I want my kids to grow up thinking, oh, they had to clean their plate, right? We have this conversation comes up, and it's kind of an old school thing of, okay, well, you have to clean your plate before you get up from the dinner table. So I found a middle road. And so what I do with my kids that I feel works pretty well is I starve them. No, just kidding. Well, kind of. So on days that I know like we're not as busy and you're getting ready to prepare dinner, like don't let your kids snack before dinner. Kids don't need as many snacks as they get. And if you don't let your kids snack so much, they will eat your healthy dinners that you fix them, and they won't fill up on more empty calories, right? So starve them, no, not really, but providing depending on what age they are. As they get older, they can go longer between meals. If they're in the toddler stage, yes, there's a little more snacking that probably goes on. So you have to be the gauge of what it is you're comfortable doing with your children, of course. But I find if I don't let my kids snack to, give them a solid like hour and a half, 2 hours before we eat dinner and be like, they ask for a snack and I'm like, no, you need to wait because dinner's coming. Then they actually eat more of their food, right? Because they're actually hungry. They're more likely to try the healthy food that's on their plate. And when we make things that that I'm like, well, I don't know if they're gonna like it, we try something new, what I encourage is that they at least try it. We put a little serving on their plate, encourage them to try it. When I know my children well enough, and again, we each know our individual children better than sometimes they know themselves. And if you know the food that's on their plate, that they like it, and they're just being picky that day, or they're, distracted with something else, or they did snack too close to dinner, and like 5 minutes later, they're going to be like, Mom, I'm hungry. And so what I do is if there's a good amount of food left on their plate, I'm like, it goes on the counter. And that's their snack when they're hungry later after dinner. Sometimes it's 5 minutes later, sometimes it's 30 minutes later, right? So that's my way of, okay, I don't make them clean their plate. I encourage them to try foods, and keep in mind that we want to keep healthy eating positive, right? We don't want to be forceful about it. We don't want it to be a negative thing. But the more we keep it positive, we educate our kids, and we tell them like, look, this is going to help if maybe their stomach hurts. Maybe your child has issues with constipation or bloating or whatever that. It could just be partly because they're not getting enough vegetables, or maybe they're not getting enough water, right? Hydration is so crucial, and making sure your kids get enough water is really, really important. Really watching the juice boxes, any juice that you may even have in your house. Really make sure it doesn't have added sugars. It needs to be real juice. And the other thing is if you're going to give them juice, I recommend watering it down. Don't put it in sippy cups for them, in bottles that they're going to like suck on all day. They're going to have a little juice. It needs to be like, here's your little tiny 4-ounce cup of watered down juice. You sit and you drink it. Because if they are sucking on milk or juices and stuff all day long, it can really wreak havoc on their teeth, and it can really build up their tolerance for needing to have that sugary taste on things. So water, water, water. And when it comes to transitioning, if your child's used to drinking more juice, well, start small. Maybe initially you do 3/4 juice and 1/4 water, and then a couple days later you start to do half water, half juice. And before you know it, if they make a little fuss about it initially, just be like, this is what we're doing now. And you could explain to them like, hey, sugar can cause disease and make you not feel well. And so again, instead of just doing it, like teach our kids, teach them. I don't care if they're 2, if they're 18 months, and especially as they're getting older, like teach them, empower your children, put the ball in their court, lead them to having amazing health as they get older. Oh, so one thing I wanted to talk about with, making sure that your kids are getting veggies and fruits, and encourage them to experiment with new things, and, maybe challenge yourself a little bit to try new things. I know I'm not the best at it, but I've really gotten a lot better over the years at, okay, I'm going to try some new stuff, and sometimes I make things and I don't love it, but I know other people that will, or my husband might love it, or my kids might love it, and I'm like, great. I'm glad they love it. It's just not my personal favorite, whatever it is. So keep that in mind, that not everybody in the family is always going to love everything. And I teach my kids that. I'm like, you're not going to love everything that you eat, right? We feed our body to nourish our body. So we have to learn to eat foods because they're healthy for us, and we may only just kind of like them. And maybe we don't even really like them, right? Yeah, broccoli, celery, it's kind of an acquired taste for many, right? As kids have a hard time eating those things like that. And maybe it's a food you won't get them to eat for years. But when we continue to put healthier options on their plate, they're going to start to eat those healthier options. Maybe not the first handful of times that you do it. They're kind of like, take a little nibble and like, oh, yeah. But just keep at it, keep doing it. Put something on their plate that you know they're going to eat, preferably gluten-free, if you ask me. And this is where I want to dive in and talk about more about, getting the toxins out, the dyes, the chemicals, because it can affect so much. It can affect allergies, or it could be kind of at the root cause of a lot of these things. Allergies, asthma, skin issues such as eczema, dry skin, all sorts of those things, behavior, ADHD. And I know there was a period where we saw quite an increase in children being diagnosed with ADHD. Well, I feel like maybe we're getting a little better. It's gone down a little bit. I feel like schools are maybe finally getting it to where they let them have more recesses and let them move around in class a little bit more, because little kids in kindergarten, first grade, they need to move more. And really, honestly, as they get older, they still need to move more. But we sit our kids in a chair, right? So making sure your children are getting enough activity, that they're actually getting that movement, that stimulation, right? We got a new puppy at home, and I'm like, gosh, it feels like kind of like a toddler, right? And a little kid, you gotta go play with them and get out that energy so they mellow out, right? And so kids are like that too with activity. So making sure your kids are getting enough activity. But back to the nutrition with this, right? At the root of so many health issues, and this goes for anybody, but especially with our children, we can start from today, no matter what age your child is, as starting to implement healthier choices. That, again, even if they don't have any of these things, but as our children start to hit that preteen and puberty stage, that's where you might start to see a shift, right? Because now they've got more hormones pumping through their body. They're starting to see changes. You're starting to see changes, the moods, all that. That might be a phase where you're like, okay, now I need to be feeding this child healthier. So don't wait until that time comes. You can start today, right? And starting to make these small transitions over. So my initial thing I teach with, again, the gluten-free, switching that out, and I will put in the show notes my one where podcast I did earlier where I talk about gluten-free specifically. Follow that same system for switching out for gluten-free with your family. It works really, really well. But initially, a good example, say your children eat cereal that, you look over to the box now while you're listening, you're like, oh, it does have carrageenan, and it's got lots of these things here. I don't even know what they are, but it's your kid's favorite cereal. Okay, so go to the store, buy a cereal that's much healthier and doesn't have that, and preferably is gluten-free, and start doing half and half of each cereal. That's what I do sometimes with things, depending on if you can do that, right? With breads, we just completely switch it over, and then I just try to minimize. So your children are just living off of breads and everything all day long, right? Get creative. Let's eat good fatty foods like avocados, and let's make smoothies. And I'm not a huge smoothie fan myself. I do eat them, but I'm not an everyday smoothie person. I never really have been. And I look back and my kids aren't big smoothie people, but I'm now that I'm really trying to get more nutrition in them, because my kids are getting older and they're so active, and they need more nourishment, more calories, good calories to feed them. And I don't want them just crashing and living off of bars and, ending up oh, we're starving, we got to go through, not that we do fast food, because I'm really, really anti-fast food, but something that's to go in a sense that's from a healthier restaurant. But still, right, then they end up eating food that really isn't as nourishing for their body, and then they're still left kind of hungry, right? Because they didn't really satisfy them. So sometimes it's just all about, we've got to make the switch, and we just got to go, some things we got to go cold turkey on, and other things we can slowly implement. And then there's the veggies, just slowly adding in more, right? And getting them to try different things. And if you latch onto something they like, well, let them eat more of that, right? But if you just keep putting it in front of them, they will eat more. And magically, you may just start to see an improvement in their behavior. Maybe you didn't even know how good your child could act because they've been getting toxins from foods that maybe you didn't even realize as much, because yeah, you go to, say, Whole Foods or a healthy store, but you still have to watch some of that stuff. Again, it's typically going to be healthier, but we still have to watch things. Occasionally, you guys, I buy something and I'm certain it's good, and I just was in a rush and I grabbed it off the shelf, and I get home and I'm like, I can't eat that. You know what I mean? So we do have to, and they can change food formulas. Like there was just the other day, something I've been getting for months, and then I happened to turn it over this morning. I would have tasted it anyway, but I looked it over and they put xylitol in it. And I know some people are like, oh, it's okay, it's fine. And I'm like, you know what? I like it better without. So why are we adding these things in? And then when we add those in, then we become a little bit dependent upon those added sweetener type things or carriers or fillers or whatever they are. So really, really look at your food. That is the first step. And then slowly on this journey that you're on to improve your health and teach and educate and your children, is that they're going to feel better and better. And you may, again, see things in them. Their eyes might sparkle a little more. All of a sudden now they don't throw that tantrum on a regular basis. Maybe that little bit of eczema or dry patch on your child's face or arm or back clears up. But keep in mind, it's not going to be an overnight thing, especially depending on how much detoxing the body has to do. Now, the body will naturally detox itself, make sure your child is hydrating really, really, really well, to being active, getting some sweat time in, and all of that can be really, really good just naturally for their little bodies to get rid of those toxins. And then we want to refuel that body with really, really good solid nutrition. But if your child has allergies, I've seen this with my son, his allergies, we still have some. We are like on super high pollen lately, and I can tell you my allergies have dramatically improved with really, really getting even better with my nutrition over the years. But with my son, now that we're in really high, like super high pollen, he definitely has to take some Claritin. I don't love it, but I will tell you, we made it longer this spring and hardly had any in the winter time and all that where we've had in the years past. So I am seeing an improvement in them, and I'm just trying to dive in deeper and figure out, okay, well, what's the next step to really help to improve this even more? And I do feel like cutting back on the grains, and that is something we're working on. We're not completely grain free in our house, but I am trying to work with that, so we're at least cutting back on that, so that helps. But asthma can be caused and started from allergies, right? The sinus drip goes down into the chest, and then they get the junky cough and they just sound wheezy. Well, that can be from allergies. It's not necessarily asthma, and I challenge any one of you with a child with asthma, if you haven't gone to a specialist. Now, I'm not saying allergy testing, okay? I'm saying specifically to check to see, is it allergies that's actually the root cause of asthma? And then we got to go deeper. What's the root cause of the allergies? Well, what's going on with the gut, right? So again, we've got to get back to balancing the body, feeding it better nutrition. And then there's the behavior aspect. And I'm still blown away that doctors are not educating parents, and I think part of it is just time and lack of having, being taught this in school, right? They're taught medicine. And if we initially improve what the child is eating that maybe has been diagnosed with a behavior issue or, ADHD, I don't know, I feel like a lot of people have, we're all so overstimulated in this world today, right? With our technology and this, that, whatever that's going on around us, that I think everybody some days has a little bit of that, right? So we have to be not so quick to diagnose a child when we need to look at what's going on with their body. If we haven't worked to clean up their gut, improve their nutrition, take them off of gluten, if you have a child that has any of this, allergies, asthma, skin, behavior issues, depression, anxiety, which you may not see that in a younger child, but in that more preteen era, you may start to see those things happen. If you have not even tried to take them off of gluten for a month minimum, then you need to do it again. You need to do it again. And I know people with like sinus stuff and allergies, they'll be like, oh, we got to take off dairy. And I'm all for taking a child off of dairy or someone off of dairy, but you have to do the gluten too. You cannot do just the dairy. I tried it many times with my son, and I know other people, I've had this conversation with so many people. You have to get that gluten out of there because it is such creates so much inflammation. Our gut is so intertwined with our brain, right? And we go back to what I talked about before, eating fats. We got to fuel our body with obviously good quality nutrition. It might take, in a couple weeks, you could probably notice a huge improvement. It may not be completely healed. I'm not saying there's never medication that may not be needed, but if we don't try the nutrition, we never really know, right? And sometimes we don't even know how well a child should be behaving because we haven't manipulated their food. Then we can, I get the question, or people will say, well, it's too expensive. It's not. If we stop buying processed food and you buy good quality fruits and veggies and nuts, and you can go to the bins now and, get by the pound, different seeds and things like that. Watch for sales, look for, good quality proteins and find what's on sale and make your meals around them, right? And when you eat better quality food and you eat more good fats, you don't need to eat as much food. Your children do not need to eat as much food, right? We've got to keep the toxins out. If you feed a child something with dye in it and they don't have dye on a regular basis, watch what happens to their behavior. Now, dyes and direct chemicals that you might see on Doritos and really those types of foods that may not have gluten in them, but candies and stuff. It's not just the sugar, you guys. Some people say, oh, it's a sugar high, sugar crash. It's more than that. Yes, sugar, obviously I'm like, let's keep the sugar low, yes. But more important than that are these toxins and these chemicals. It's like they're not in control of their behavior, right? We might get frustrated with them. Why are you acting this way? And what have you? And they may not even know. And then that might just spiral down into them having a tantrum and a meltdown. And they don't even know why they're feeling that way because these toxins are invading their body, right? So we have got to be aware of that. Now, other things, it may be the next day when a child has gluten and then you notice their behavior. And this is, I get questions. I'm like, okay, well, if I do this at home, but then they go to a grandparent's or a friend's house, but then they eat something there, you have to set the boundaries and say, we've discovered, my son, daughter really is not doing well or is doing so much better. Put it positive, is doing so much better not having gluten and not having anything with dyes in it. And bring food, or if they go to a friend's house, send them with a snack or talk to the parent and be like, okay, what's the plan for snacks today? So I know it's something that I'm okay with my child eating. It sounds a little micromanaging, I know. But at the end of the day, if it makes your child feel better, because again, sometimes children also don't know how good that they could feel. You don't know how good your child should be feeling because maybe you've never seen them without those toxins in their body because it's slowly crept in over the years. We all fall into that. I mean, I know there was a period of time where my children were not gluten-free, and I like my children a lot better without gluten in their body and without toxins and chemicals because they're a heck of a lot nicer to everybody, and their bodies are just so much healthier, and that really can affect their development. Okay, so as we get on into the preteen and teenage years, and so wherever your child is right now, especially if they're home with you right now and you have more control over what your child is eating, I can't stress enough, start making changes ASAP. You can decide to go cold turkey on stuff. If you've got extra stuff, you can donate it. You can throw it away, whatever it is you feel best to do, or you're like, nope, I need to use this food. Then you can, as you go to the store and buy new stuff, start buying better quality food, preferably not processed. I know we all end up falling into, okay, we gotta buy a little processed because we're so busy, crazy, but a little bit of preparation really go a long ways. And a lot of knowledge, a lot of teaching our children can go that much farther, okay? Knowledge is power with our children. Right now today, while you have control, I cannot stress it enough. Go look through your cabinets today, start looking at stuff, and you might really just be blown away at the foods that you're like, okay, wow, I didn't know that. Next time you go to the store. And I will put a list of, I'm going to add some recipes in the show notes. What was the ones I was going to add? I was going to add the pizza that we make at home. And it's grain-free. You can make it dairy-free. Sometimes I'll mix a little bit, and kind of play around with it. But you also have to watch with, for instance, dairy-free things with gums in them and all of that. And then there's a couple other recipes. I'll put the smoothie, my son really likes. Still working on those girls of mine with smoothies, but baby steps. We'll get there because, every time you make something, they'll have a little bit more of it, and eventually I will convert them into, eating our good, healthy smoothies. But really, really do not be afraid to teach your children, and we'll put in some fun little extra information in other podcasts that I highly recommend that you listen to from a nutrition perspective, because yes, children's nutrition is a little bit different than adults, but not necessarily. It's really more that their metabolism is higher for the most part, and that they may need some more carbohydrates, but their carbohydrates really could be coming from fruits and veggies and good healthy foods, and they're going to feel so much more energized, and they're not going to have the crash that they get with the standard carbohydrate foods and things like that, and sugars obviously. So thank you all so much for tuning in. Please share this episode with whoever you feel could really benefit from listening to this, and just bringing a little bit more awareness to how important it is that we educate our kids so that they're healthier and their development is a little bit smoother, right, as they get into that middle school and high school. And then we've set them up for such great healthy habits as they go off into the world on their own. A lot of the stuff that I'm teaching my kids now, we didn't even know this 20 years ago. I feel like I'm dating myself. But anyway, thank you all so much for tuning in. If you love this episode, I would love for you to also leave a review on iTunes. I'm so grateful for every review anyone leaves for the podcast, because that means more and more people can hear my podcast interviews, and we can bring more awareness to improving the quality of life for everybody, really, at the end of the day. And if you have questions, please reach out to me, email me back on any emails that you receive from me, or reach out on Instagram at Erica Zeal. Thank you all so much, and I will see you back next week. The material contained within is provided for educational and informational purposes only, and is not intended as medical advice. You should seek prompt medical care for any specific health issues and consult your physician before beginning a new regimen or purchasing any products.